Your meal, sir. The tray landed on the fold-out table with a subtle thud, not a hint of care in the motion. The flight attendant's voice was clipped, her eyes barely making contact before she turned on her heel and walked away. Elias Chapman looked down. What greeted him wasn't just a sandwich, it was a warning. The bread was discolored at the corners, pale greenish spots bleeding into the crust, and a faint yellow fuzz was creeping across the top slice like moss on stone. Even before peeling the bread apart, the smell hinted at something long past fresh. He did not speak. Not yet. The first-class cabin of Skywing Airway's Flight 268 was quiet, cushioned by the usual hum of climate control and muted conversation. A few heads turned, then quickly turned away. The man in seat 2A wasn't shouting, wasn't causing trouble, he was simply staring at his tray. Dressed in a black suit and crisp white shirt, Elias blended into the rows of business travelers around him. Nothing about his appearance screamed power or wealth. Yet in that moment, a storm began to gather. Quietly, methodically, inside the man with the ruined sandwich. He picked up a linen napkin and placed it gently over the tray. One breath in, one breath out. This was not the first time he had been served something less than what he deserved, but today would be the last time it happened without consequence. Before we go any further, let me know where in the world you're watching from. Drop a comment below with your city or state. I'd love to know. And tell me this. Have you ever been treated like you didn't belong, even when you paid the same as everyone else? Elias Chapman had always believed in staying 10 steps ahead, preferably from behind the curtain. From the outside, he looked like any other seasoned executive traveling for business. A well-fitted black suit, a crisp white shirt, clean black dress shoes, and a brown leather briefcase worn just enough to suggest use without wear. His hair was cut short and neat. A close-trimmed beard framed a face that radiated calm control. There was nothing flashy about him. No designer logos. No loud watch. No entourage. If you saw him sitting in a first-class cabin, you'd assume he was competent, professional, and utterly forgettable. And that was exactly how Elias liked it. What few people on Skywing Airway's Flight 268 knew was that the man in seat 2A wasn't just another frequent flyer. He was the co-founder and CEO of Global Flow Logistics, one of the largest end-to-end supply chain optimization firms in the Western Hemisphere. He also sat atop Verdant Harvest, a vertically integrated agricultural powerhouse exporting to over 30 countries. His private equity firm had quietly finalized a multi-phase strategic investment in Skywing just 2 months earlier, making Elias the airline's second-largest shareholder, holding a solid 20% stake. He wasn't just a passenger. He was one of the reasons this airline was still flying, and yet he had chosen to keep that fact to himself. He could have boarded early, taken advantage of VIP check-in, or even asked to meet the captain before takeoff. But Elias preferred to walk the path of the customer, not the owner. He often told his closest team, "You don't fix a broken system by reading reports. You fix it by sitting inside it, silently, and watching who gets stepped on." Seat 2A had been reserved under a personal alias, just as he always did when traveling solo. Only one person on the airline's staff knew his true identity, and that was Diane Chen, head of HR. Everyone else saw a composed black man in a standard business suit. Just another executive en route to another meeting. That was fine by Elias. That was the point. What made this flight different wasn't just the route or the aircraft. It was the first flight since the investment deal closed, and the first time he would test the newly installed cabin surveillance system, a pilot program funded and developed by his own company, Global Flow. All premium cabins had been outfitted with discrete, high-definition, audio-visual recording devices with 30 days of cloud storage and encrypted access for internal review. The technology wasn't just for show. Elias had personally signed off on the design. No red lights, no intrusive placement. Invisible, but precise, like the man himself. When booking Flight 268, Elias had submitted a detailed request. A bottle of Dalmore 21 to be served before takeoff, a light pescatarian meal free from red meat or heavy dairy, and a quiet window seat for privacy. He had received confirmation for each item within minutes. He had even double-checked with his executive assistant, Jessica, to ensure the preferences were logged, which is why, when the sandwich landed with a faint odor and visible signs of spoilage, Elias knew immediately. This wasn't a system error. This was something else. Something older. Something uglier. He sat back, fingers resting on the armrest, and watched. There was no fury in his eyes, only calculation. He'd learned long ago that power didn't shout. It waited. It listened. He was the man behind the curtain. But today, the curtain was about to fall. The differences were subtle at first. Elias watched as Tiffany Mills moved through the first-class cabin with the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. Her smile bloomed effortlessly when she reached the silver-haired man in 2B. "Mr. Denning," she cooed, "would you care for a glass of champagne while we prepare for departure?" Her voice was warm, even playful. She placed a hot towel on his tray with both hands, folded perfectly. When she turned to Elias, the air shifted. There was no smile, only a glance, clipped and brief. "Towel," she said. The word came out flat, transactional. The towel landed on his tray with one hand, crooked and slightly damp. No mention of his pre-ordered Dalmore. No, Mr. Chapman. Just a cold, indifferent gesture. Then she moved on. Elias didn't react, not externally. But years of sitting in rooms where his value was questioned taught him to recognize when someone made a decision about who you were before you even spoke. He had seen it in investor meetings, at border checkpoints, in restaurants too fine to say no but just rude enough to make you feel unwelcome. And now, here, on a plane where he owned nearly a fifth of the company, he saw it again. He turned his gaze to the aisle. Tiffany was now at row 3, chatting brightly with a couple in their 40s, handing out champagne and laughing at a joke the woman had made. Her posture had changed, shoulders relaxed, voice melodic. Not 5 seconds earlier, she had been cold and mechanical with him. It wasn't random, it was calibrated. 10 minutes passed. Still no drink. Elias watched as 3 other passengers were served their requests. Sparkling wine, whiskey, a cocktail with mint leaves. The bar cart was fully stocked, he noted. So where was his Dalmore? He pressed the call button. Tiffany returned, her smile gone. "Yes? I believe I'm still waiting for the Dalmore 21 I requested," Elias said, his tone measured and professional. "It was noted in my reservation." Tiffany hesitated. "We're actually out of that," she said after a beat. "I can offer you orange juice or perhaps some water instead." "Out of Dalmore 21? Elias raised an eyebrow. "I received a confirmation with my ticket. Would you mind double-checking?" He tapped his tablet and turned it slightly, showing her the reservation note. Tiffany's eyes flicked over it, then away. Sometimes the system confirms items that aren't loaded. It happens. We don't have it today. Elias studied her for a moment. "Is that so?" Without waiting for an answer, Tiffany turned and walked away. Not a word of apology, not a follow-up, just a hasty retreat. Elias sat back slowly, eyes narrowing. It wasn't just the missing drink, it was the pattern. The smile that vanished when she faced him. The tone that shifted. The towel flung one-handed. The bar cart stocked, but the Dalmore denied. He unlocked his tablet and opened his secure app. Jessica, minor incident on Flight 268. Pre-requested drink not served. Interaction with FA suggests discrepancy in treatment. Please flag this for HR and confirm when cabin surveillance activation began on this aircraft. Also, cross-check Tiffany Mills in our internal feedback system. A few seconds later, her reply came through. Jessica, surveillance has been active since rollout last month. 268 was was updated 2 weeks ago. Everything is being recorded. Checking Tiffany now. Will update shortly. Elias placed the tablet down gently and glanced toward the galley, where Tiffany and another attendant were whispering behind the curtain. They did not look in his direction, but he was looking at them closely. This wasn't a mistake. It was a signal. The meal cart began rolling down the aisle just as Elias finished scanning a status update from Jessica on his tablet. From his seat near the front of the cabin, he watched as Tiffany resumed her performance, smiles flowing freely, gestures graceful, tone sweetened to perfection. For each passenger she served, there was a moment of connection, a recommendation here, a joke there. She remembered someone's preference for no mushrooms, offered another an extra piece of sourdough without them even asking. Then came Elias's turn. There was no greeting, no eye contact, no explanation. She placed a covered tray on his table without a word, as if he were an afterthought, then moved on before he had the chance to respond. Elias removed the lid slowly. What sat beneath was a sad-looking sandwich on dry, cracked bread. There was no fruit garnish, no wine pairing, not even the light pescatarian entree he had requested when booking. Beside the sandwich sat a paper cup half filled with warm apple juice. The contrast was too obvious to ignore. Across the aisle, the silver-haired man, Mr. Denning, was being presented with seared salmon and herbed risotto, plated on fine china with a side of sautéed asparagus and a full glass of wine. Tiffany was still with him, explaining the wine selection and smiling as she arranged the utensils. Elias glanced at his tray again. No utensils, no napkin. He closed the lid slowly and pressed the call button. No one came. After nearly 3 minutes, a younger male flight attendant approached. His name tag read Mark. He looked barely out of training, with a nervous energy that clung to his posture. "Is there something I can assist you with, sir?" "Yes," Elias replied, keeping his tone calm. "I believe there's been a mistake with my meal. I pre-selected a pescatarian dish, no red meat, no heavy dairy, and instead, I've received a basic sandwich that appears questionable." "Oh, fish." Mark leaned over slightly, glancing at the tray with little interest. "We've had to make a few substitutions today due to limited inventory. That happens sometimes, especially with specialty meals." "I understand substitutions," Elias replied evenly. "What I do not understand is why the rest of the cabin appears to have received exactly what they ordered, while mine not only differs completely, but arrived with no explanation." Mark offered a tight-lipped smile. "Would you like me to check if we have anything left from business class?" Elias raised an eyebrow. "Not quite yet. I'd like someone to explain what happened to the meal I ordered." Mark hesitated, then offered a vague, "I'll check with the purser," before retreating behind the curtain. Left alone again, Elias studied the sandwich more closely. The bread was dry in the center, but near one edge, just beneath the crust, a small green smear was visible. Mold. He turned the sandwich slightly. A faint yellow spot marbled through the lower corner. It wasn't just poor quality, it was spoiled, and someone had placed it in front of him as though it were acceptable. Just then, a voice cut through the quiet. From the other side of the aisle, a small girl, maybe 6 or 7, tugged at her mother's sleeve. She pointed toward Elias's tray and whispered, not quite as quiet as she thought she was, "Mommy, why does that man's food look gross? Did they mess up?" A hush fell around them. The girl's mother gently pulled her closer, whispering something back. But it was too late. The comment had landed. Several passengers turned toward Elias, their curiosity heightened now that a child had voiced what they were all thinking. Elias offered a tight smile toward the mother, who mouthed an apology. He waved it off gently. This was the moment. The quiet observation had just gone public. He reached for his tablet again, jotting down a second note to Jessica. This time, not just about the food, but about the optics. Multiple passengers were noticing. He requested immediate flagging of the incident to Skywing's internal oversight team. He also asked whether any prior service issues involving first-class passengers of color had been reported on Flight 268 or others involving Tiffany Mills. When he looked up, a man in his 60s, seated nearby, white hair, pressed shirt, reading glasses, gave Elias a slow nod. It wasn't pity. It was recognition. Another man, 2 rows back, shifted uncomfortably in his seat, having heard the child's comment and seen the difference between meals. The whispering began. Not disruptive, but visible. The infection point had spread. It wasn't just that Elias had been served something beneath the standard. It was that everyone could now see it. The comparison had become undeniable. And still, no one had returned with an explanation. Elias kept his composure as the silence around him thickened. The meal tray remained in front of him, a quiet but undeniable piece of evidence. He pressed the call button again, more deliberately this time. Almost 2 minutes passed before someone appeared. It was not Tiffany. Instead, the same young attendant from earlier, Mark, returned, looking slightly more apprehensive than before. "Yes, sir? I'd like to speak to the purser," Elias said evenly. "About my meal and overall service." Mark hesitated. "Is there something specific I can help you with instead?" "I already explained the issue," Elias replied, his voice calm but firm. "This is a formal request." Mark nodded and turned to leave. A few moments later, a woman in her 40s appeared. Her posture was crisp, uniform immaculate, hair neatly pinned back. She introduced herself as Jeanette, the lead purser on Flight 268. "Mr. Chapman," she began politely, "I understand you have a concern about the service this evening?" "That's correct," Elias said. "I pre-ordered a pescatarian meal, selected a pre-departure drink, and specified my preferences through the airline's premium system. None of those were honored. Instead, I received an unrequested, potentially spoiled sandwich, without explanation or apology. This is not just a matter of inconvenience, it is a pattern of disparity." The purser's smile tightened. "I apologize if your expectations weren't met. Sometimes supply logistics force us to make adjustments." "I understand supply issues," Elias replied. "But what I don't understand is why every other passenger seems to have received the correct meal, while I, despite my advance request and status, received this." He gestured toward the tray still on his table. Jeanette didn't look down. "We prioritize meal distribution based on multiple factors: status tier, loyalty metrics, and availability. I am a platinum tier flyer," Elias said. 200,000 miles last year alone. I also happen to be one of your airline's top 20 shareholders." The purser blinked, her professional facade flickering for the first time. "Please excuse me," she said quickly. "I'll check again." End quote. As she turned away, Elias noticed something, a flicker of movement just behind the curtain separating the galley. Tiffany was peeking through the gap, speaking in hushed tones to Mark, who cast another look toward Elias and shook his head nervously. Moments later, Tiffany herself emerged, her face tight with irritation thinly disguised as concern. "Mr. Chapman," she said, stepping forward, "we understand you're dissatisfied with your meal. As my colleague mentioned, there are occasional shortages on specialty items." "This is not about shortages," Elias replied, keeping his voice low. "This is about consistency. It is also about tone, attitude, and respect." Tiffany crossed her arms lightly. "Sir, with all due respect, we've done what we can under the circumstances. If the food is not to your liking, we can arrange a snack box from economy." From economy. That word hung in the air like a quiet insult. "I paid for first class," Elias replied, still calm. "Not just for legroom and service upgrades, but for the same standard of dignity and consistency as everyone else in this cabin." "And you've received that," Tiffany snapped, losing the last of her polished veneer. "We can't always cater to every individual preference, especially when some guests expect to be treated like royalty." The words landed, loud, defensive, sharp. The cabin fell silent again. Conversations that had resumed after the earlier tension died down mid-sentence. Several passengers leaned slightly forward, watching, Elias did not raise his voice. "Let me be clear," he said softly. "I didn't ask for anything beyond what I requested when I booked this ticket. I didn't ask for more than any other first-class passenger here received. I asked for the same. The difference is how you chose to respond." Tiffany glanced around, realizing how many eyes were now on her. She stepped back and muttered under her breath, just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear, "Maybe people should be grateful to even sit up here. Always pushing for more." The comment rippled through the air. One row behind Elias, an older man, the same one who had nodded earlier, rose slightly and turned to face Tiffany. "Excuse me," he said, his voice steady but commanding. "I heard what you just said. That's not just unprofessional. That's out of line." Tiffany stiffened, but before she could respond, the cabin intercom clicked on. The captain's voice came through. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mitchell Grant. We ask that all passengers remain seated and respectful of crew instructions. Any disruptions will be addressed appropriately." A veiled warning. Elias could feel the narrative trying to shift, recasting his calm, deliberate concerns as some form of unruliness. The intercom tone was familiar. Not loud, not accusatory, but clear. "There's a problem, passenger, and we're watching." He sat straighter. This wasn't his first time being framed as the issue for raising a concern, but it might be the last time someone tried to do so on an aircraft that he co-owned, because now he wasn't the only one watching. Elias stayed seated, his posture composed, as the captain's voice faded from the intercom. Around him, a quiet discomfort simmered. Passengers fidgeted in their seats, some stealing glances at the tray table with the untouched sandwich. Others looked between Elias and the galley, sensing the escalation but unsure of its cause. Elias opened his secure tablet app again, this time with more deliberate purpose. He began drafting a message to Jessica. "Situation on flight 268, escalating. Cabin service discriminatory. Mold found in food. Verbal implication from FA regarding who belongs in first class. Captain issuing vague warning via intercom. I suggest legal begins monitoring real time. Surveillance système active, correct?" Before he could finish typing, a new figure appeared. Captain Mitchell Grant emerged from the cockpit. He wore his authority like a starched collar, rigid, unmistakable. His stride was firm, his expression carefully neutral but brimming with controlled irritation. As he stepped into the first-class cabin, conversation stopped entirely. He approached Elias's row with practiced command, speaking in a voice pitched just loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Mr. Chapman," he began, "I understand there have been some concerns raised about your in-flight experience." Elias looked up slowly. "Yes, Captain. There have. I'd like to remind you," Grant continued, "that crew instructions must be followed at all times, and that the safety and comfort of all passengers is our top priority." "I haven't disregarded any instructions," Elias replied. "I've simply asked for the service I paid for." The captain's jaw flexed. "Our flight attendants have reported that your behavior is creating discomfort for others." "Have I been loud?" Elias asked. "Number one, hostile. No, but then I'd like to understand how calmly questioning why I was served spoiled food, and why discriminatory comments were made in earshot of other passengers, constitutes a disruption." The words dropped with weight. Several passengers shifted, visibly tense. A woman across the aisle leaned slightly forward, her eyes wide. Grant's expression hardened. "I've made the decision that if this issue escalates further, I will be forced to divert this flight to the nearest airport." A collective murmur spread through the cabin. Elias's face remained still. That would be unfortunate, especially given that the surveillance system on this aircraft is active and has likely recorded every interaction since we boarded. The captain blinked. "That system was installed 3 months ago," Elias continued, "at the request of stakeholders like myself, to ensure quality and accountability in premium service. And I know for a fact Flight 268 received its update 2 weeks ago. Now it was Grant's turn to glance around. "I suggest you reconsider how you frame this situation," Elias said quietly. "Because I'm not the only one watching anymore, and I will not allow this to be reframed as misconduct when what I've done, openly and respectfully, is request equal treatment." Grant took a half-step back. Behind him, Tiffany stood partially hidden behind the curtain, visibly pale. Then suddenly, a child's voice rang out from economy class, piercing the heavy silence. "Mom, why does that man's sandwich look rotten? It's all green." Heads turned. Elias turned slowly toward the sound. A young girl, 7 or 8, stood on her seat in row 13. Her wide eyes stared toward the front of the plane. Her mother hushed her quickly, embarrassed. But the question had landed. Passengers who hadn't seen the tray were now craning their necks. Someone in business class reached for their phone. The atmosphere shifted. Again, Grant looked toward the voice, then back at Elias. A few rows behind, Mr. Baines, the older white gentleman in the gray blazer, rose quietly from his seat and stepped forward. "Captain," he said, voice steady, "I've been observing this situation from the start. This gentleman has remained polite, professional, and calm while being served a meal that should not have left any airline galley." The captain frowned. "Sir, I appreciate your concern, but I'm a retired federal judge," Baines continued, "and I'll be filing a formal statement when we land. If this flight is diverted over this man raising concerns about being served moldy food and mistreated by your staff, I will ensure the legal framing of this incident reflects the full truth, not the version you're trying to present." More murmurs followed. Even Tiffany, still lingering behind the galley curtain, seemed to lose color. Captain Grant's face twitched. "You're escalating a manageable situation into a corporate scandal," Baines added. "I suggest you reconsider." Elias didn't move. He didn't need to. The truth was unfolding on its own. Captain Grant exhaled sharply, glancing toward the curtain where Tiffany and a younger attendant stood frozen. Then, without another word, he turned and walked back toward the cockpit. Elias sat still, his eyes closing for a long moment. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He was resolved. Because this wasn't just a personal slight, this was a pattern, a systemic habit of masking injustice behind politeness and policy. But not today. Captain Grant returned to the cockpit, his steps slower than when he had emerged. The power dynamic in the cabin had shifted, and it was now impossible to ignore. Elias remained seated in silence, but the tension around him was electric. Something had been exposed. Something bigger than a ruined sandwich or a few clipped remarks. The thin veil of professionalism had been pierced, and beneath it was something much darker. Passengers in the rows nearby whispered among themselves, exchanging hushed comments and visible glances. A few began checking their phones, documenting what had unfolded, while others simply stared ahead, unwilling or unsure how to react. Elias's tablet buzzed softly. Jessica's message had come through. "Surveillance confirmed. Audio and video recording live. Legal is backing up the feed now. Do you want transcript initiated?" He tapped back quickly. "Yes. Priority on galley audio and FA conversations. Include timestamp from beverage service onward." Within minutes, the first transcript appeared, scrolling across the screen like a digital confession. "Claire, I don't care if he ordered it. That's what we're giving him. He can eat it or go hungry. Michael, you think he's going to make a scene?" "Claire, they always do. Then they act like they're victims. Just let him have the damn sandwich." "Michael, he's watching us. Maybe we should just swap it out." "Claire, and admit fault?" "Number. Besides, Captain's got our back." Captain Grant, "If it escalates, we'll just divert. He won't want that kind of attention." "They never do." Elias didn't flinch. But he did press one button, forward to legal plus Diane Chen. The evidence was no longer just implied. It was irrefutable. He looked up to see Mr. Baines returning to his seat, his jaw clenched tight, eyes burning with controlled anger. Across the aisle, the woman who had recorded part of the earlier exchange was quietly sending the video to someone. The cabin had become its own courtroom, witnesses, documentation, and a silent jury. And then, through the slight part in the galley curtain, he saw Natalie. She was the youngest member of the crew, probably mid-20s, with soft features and an unsure posture. She had been silent most of the flight, helping Tiffany and Michael from the background. But now, she stood still, holding a drinks tray but not moving, her eyes fixed on Elias. A moment passed before she stepped forward. She didn't make a grand statement or demand attention. She simply walked up to Elias's row and lowered her voice just enough for only him to hear. "Sir," she said, eyes flicking toward the galley, "I just wanted to say, I saw what happened, and I'm sorry." And Elias turned to look at her. She continued, "I don't agree with what they did, and I didn't know what to do in the moment, but if anyone asks, I'll tell the truth. I think you deserve that." He met her gaze for a long moment, then gave a slight nod. "Thank you," he said quietly. She nodded back, her hands trembling slightly as she turned and disappeared behind the curtain again. Elias watched her go, not with satisfaction, but with a quiet recognition that not everyone on board was willing to be complicit. Then the intercom clicked. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is your first officer. We are currently coordinating with air traffic control due to a minor route adjustment. Please remain seated with your seatbelts fastened. More information will follow shortly." It was a thinly veiled message. They were stalling. Elias opened his messaging app again and typed another message to Jessica. "Prepare board alert. If diversion occurs, we treat as breach of service protocol. Media inquiries likely incoming." Passengers were growing restless. A businessman across from Elias muttered something under his breath about missing his connecting flight. The young girl from earlier peeked again between the seats, looking up at her mother, who now had her arm protectively around her daughter's shoulders. Elias sat still, eyes focused forward. He wasn't chasing attention, but attention had found him, not because he raised his voice, but because he refused to lower it when something wrong had been done. That simple act, holding ground with calm clarity, had begun to ripple across the aircraft. One truth exposed another, one witness inspired a second, and even silence, when chosen with purpose, became louder than shouting. The flight hadn't landed, but something had already arrived. The tipping point. The aircraft jolted slightly as it descended toward Denver International Airport. Cabin lights dimmed to landing mode. The overhead chime rang out, but it was not routine. Elias sat upright, eyes open, fully aware of what was happening. Around him, the cabin was filled with low murmurs and speculative glances. Passengers clutched armrests, flipped their tray tables back, and exchanged worried expressions. Even the crew, those who still had the confidence to show their faces, moved stiffly. Without their usual robotic cheer, Captain Grant's voice returned to the intercom, attempting to mask his unraveling command behind protocol. "Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be making an unscheduled landing at Denver International due to a minor technical irregularity. Please remain in your seats and follow all instructions from the flight crew. We appreciate your cooperation." The lie was thin. Everyone knew it. There had been no turbulence, no mechanical warning, no indicator lights. What had malfunctioned was far less visible. A system built on silence and complicity. Elias opened his secure messaging app and typed quickly, "Confirmed diversion. Frame as retaliatory action. Diane Chen to meet at gate. Legal to coordinate with airport." Jessica's response came almost instantly. "Already in place. HR and compliance will board immediately. Surveillance pull complete." Chairman notified. Media escalation possible. As the plane approached the runway, the tension was almost unbearable. Mr. Baines looked across the aisle. "You okay?" he asked quietly. Elias gave a single nod. "I've seen worse," he replied. And he had. He had been dragged aside at customs in his college years for no reason other than his appearance, told he didn't look like someone who could afford a business ticket. Denied upgrades he'd earned, passed over in conversations on purpose. This wasn't new, but it had never reached this scale. This visibility, this reckoning. The aircraft touched down with a forceful thud. Reverse thrusters kicked in. Wheels screeched. Passengers swayed in their seats, startled more by the context than the landing itself. There was no warm welcome to Denver. No cheery update from the cockpit. Instead, a chilling silence. Then a faint hiss as the cabin door unlocked. No one stood. No one reached for their bags. They waited. Captain Grant emerged first. His walk was rigid, jaw clenched, eyes avoiding Elias's. He approached Elias's row with calculated neutrality and stopped just short of direct confrontation. "Mr. Chapman," he said flatly, "I'm going to need you to deplane first. There are representatives waiting at the gate to speak with you." Elias looked at him without blinking. "For what reason, Captain?" "It's a procedural matter," Grant replied. "They'll explain at the gate. Then perhaps they can come aboard and explain here," Elias countered calmly. "Because I have no intention of exiting until I know why this diversion occurred." The tension ratcheted up again. Grant shifted uncomfortably. "This is not the appropriate forum for that discussion." "I think it is," Elias replied, gesturing subtly to the cabin around them. "These passengers have had their plans disrupted. They deserve to know why." Passengers murmured their agreement. "Mr. Baines cleared his throat audibly. "What exactly was the technical issue, Captain?" Elias continued. "Was it the beverage cart? The galley oven? Or was it that you realized the truth was getting too loud to control?" Before the captain could respond, the front cabin door opened, but instead of airport security, a composed woman in a Navy suit stepped aboard, flanked by two individuals in Skywing Airway uniforms. Diane Chen's presence landed like a verdict. "Captain Grant," she began, her voice controlled but cold, "you may return to the cockpit. You and your crew are being temporarily relieved of duty pending an immediate review of the incident." Grant froze. "Excuse me? You are no longer in command of this aircraft," Diane said. "The board has been notified. Mr. Chapman is not to be removed. You will remain on standby until further notice." A murmur rippled through the cabin. Diane turned to Elias, her expression softening. "Mr. Chapman, on behalf of Skywing Airway's executive team, I apologize for what you've experienced. Our HR, legal, and oversight units are in position. A new crew is boarding now to complete the journey." She lowered her voice slightly. "You were right to escalate. The footage confirms everything." Elias stood slowly. "I'm not here for a power struggle," he said. "I just wanted a seat, a meal, and the dignity I paid for." Diane nodded solemnly. "And you're going to get much more than that. Please stay on board while we handle the transition. You'll be debriefed only if you choose." Behind her, two crew members stepped forward to address Claire and Michael, who had been lingering just beyond view. Tiffany Mills. "Michael Barton, please collect your belongings and prepare to deplane immediately. Your access credentials have been temporarily suspended." Michael's mouth opened, but Claire interrupted with venom. "This is ridiculous. All because he didn't like his sandwich? You're letting him ruin our careers?" Diane didn't flinch. "You served moldy food. You were recorded mocking a passenger's presence in first class. You weaponized procedure. The surveillance speaks for itself." As Claire blanched, her eyes darting to the ceiling as if spotting the cameras for the first time, the reality of the moment struck like a blow. This flight had reached its real destination: accountability. As the replacement crew completed final checks and passengers settled back into their seats, the cabin atmosphere had shifted. What had once been a tense and hostile environment now felt suspended in a strange silence, part relief, part disbelief. No one had expected to witness a full upheaval of power. Justice served mid-flight, and yet they had. Elias Chapman remained seated, his posture composed, but his mind racing ahead. What came next would matter even more than what had just occurred. Diane Chen approached quietly, this time holding a sleek black clipboard. "Mr. Chapman," she said in a tone no longer managerial but deferential, "I've spoken with the board and senior counsel. You're fully authorized to make a statement to the passengers if you wish." Elias looked around the cabin. Some passengers stared at him with curiosity. Others looked down, unsure how to process what they'd just seen. He knew this wasn't just about vindication. It was about framing what had happened into something meaningful. "I'll do it," he said, "but not to defend myself. To clarify what this moment should mean." She handed him the intercom handset. The device felt small in his hand, but heavy in implication. He stood, stepped to the front of the first-class cabin, and waited for the soft chime of the system signaling he had the mic. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang through the cabin clear and calm, "I appreciate your patience during today's unexpected detour." He paused. "Many of you witnessed some or all of what unfolded here today. Some may have only heard fragments. But for everyone on this flight, our journey was interrupted not because of engine failure or weather, but because of something less visible and far more corrosive." The cabin fell silent. "I was served moldy food while others enjoyed meals I also ordered and paid for. I was spoken to with disdain while others were welcomed with warmth. When I asked for answers, I was accused of being disruptive, and when I pushed back, with evidence, with calm, with professionalism, our aircraft was diverted under false pretenses." A murmur of agreement rippled through the cabin. "What the flight crew didn't know is that I am not just a passenger. I am one of Skywing Airway's largest stakeholders, and I also happen to be the person responsible for implementing the surveillance system in this cabin, one designed to ensure fairness and service quality." Gasps rose from a few passengers. Today, that system did its job. It captured every word, every action, every decision, but more importantly, your presence, your witnessing, amplified the truth. And truth, when made visible, is undeniable. He took a breath. "I've spent my career building systems, logistics, agriculture, and now air travel. But systems mean nothing if the people within them act with bias, or worse, are allowed to harm others without consequence. Today, we begin to correct that." Elias glanced toward the cockpit, then back to the passengers. "This is not about one crew or one airline. This is about an entire industry. An industry where quiet prejudice hides behind smiles and uniforms, where the cost of dignity is too often charged to the people least able to speak up." He looked directly at the little girl in economy who had noticed his sandwich earlier. Her wide eyes peered back. "To that child, thank you. Sometimes the most honest observations come from those who haven't yet learned to filter the truth. And to every passenger on this flight, you've been impacted by what happened. Even if the discrimination wasn't directed at you, you were delayed, you were disturbed, and for that, I apologize." Diane stepped forward, offering him a folded document. He read aloud. "Skywing Airway will be issuing a full refund for this flight to every passenger aboard. In addition, each of you will receive $10,000 in compensation and 5 years of complimentary elite status, effective immediately." Gasps turned to applause, then sustained clapping. Elias waited for quiet. "But that's not enough," he continued, "because money fades. What lasts is change. That's why, today, I'm announcing the founding of the National Passenger Oversight Council, a new, independent body created in collaboration with federal aviation regulators. Its mission will be to monitor, investigate, and recommend actions regarding discrimination or misconduct on U.S. commercial flights. He let the words settle. This council will not belong to Skywing alone. It will span multiple airlines, include whistleblower protections, and gather anonymous passenger reports. It will give voice to those too often silenced. And it will be funded, initially, by me. Another ripple of murmurs. Elias placed the intercom handset back into its cradle and sat down. Mr. Baines leaned toward him and whispered, "You didn't just make a point. You started something." Elias looked out the window as Denver's terminal drew closer. "No," he said softly. "We all did." The flight resumed with a new sense of order. With the replacement crew in place, the aircraft pushed back from the gate and began taxiing toward the runway once again. Yet this was no longer the same flight. Something fundamental had shifted. Not just in the hierarchy of command, but in the hearts and awareness of every passenger on board. Elias sat quietly in seat 2A. Though he had delivered his public statement, initiated compensation, and announced the creation of the National Passenger Oversight Council, he knew the real work had just begun. Beside him, Mr. Baines tapped into his phone, already drafting a message to his civic group about what he had witnessed. Across the aisle, a young woman wiped her eyes discreetly. In the economy cabin, passengers murmured with each other, not gossiping, but reflecting, processing. Diane returned to Elias's side, this time with a digital tablet. "We've started processing compensation," she said. "Passenger banking apps are already pinging. The rollout will be complete before landing." "Good," Elias said softly. "It's not about the money, but it's a message people understand quickly." She smiled faintly. "Also, we've locked the surveillance footage. Legal has confirmed. Nothing was tampered with. Nothing was lost. Full transcript and video are backed up on 3 systems. Arbitration hearings are being scheduled for Claire, Michael, and Captain Grant." Elias nodded, but said nothing. His thoughts were elsewhere. By the time the flight touched down in San Francisco, the story had already gone viral. Social media feeds were ablaze with hashtags. Flight 268, Moldy Meal, Black CEO Justice. Several passengers had already posted video clips. National outlets were reaching out, and the headlines were impossible to ignore. Skywing Airway diverts flight after racial discrimination claim. CEO was on board. Surveillance reveals racist remarks. Moldy food served to black executive. Elias walked off the plane, not into silence, but into a waiting room filled with journalists, government observers, and Skywing executives. But he didn't stop. He walked straight into a private lounge, closed the door behind him, and opened his tablet to begin preparing his presentation to the Skywing board. Hours later, he stood in front of a sleek mahogany conference table, his slides illuminating the walls behind him. "In the past 12 months, he began, Skywing Airway received 13 documented service complaints from passengers of color in premium cabins. 6 of them specifically named Tiffany Mills. All 6 were either dismissed without investigation or resolved with generic vouchers." Several executives shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. "This is not a personnel problem," Elias continued, his voice calm but firm. "It is a cultural one. And culture doesn't change with apologies, it changes with systems." He moved to the next slide. "This is the reform roadmap. Full audit of all passenger complaints in the last 5 years, revised training, independent review panels with demographic diversity, expanded surveillance in all premium and economy cabins, and a permanent seat on Skywing's board for a representative of the Passenger Oversight Council." Gasps, murmurs. Pushback began. "Won't this invite liability?" one board member asked. "Liability already exists," Elias replied. "The only question is whether we control the narrative or let it control us." Another questioned the budget. You've already spent over $10 million in compensation, and that's just this one flight." Elias didn't flinch. "What we spent today was not a cost, it was an investment. Because the cost of not doing this is public trust. And once we lose that, there's no refund high enough." The board fell silent. Finally, the chairman leaned forward. "We'll back your proposal," he said. "It won't be easy, but after what we've seen, there's no other path." In the months that followed, the changes rippled outward. Tiffany Mills, Michael Barton, and Captain Grant were terminated after arbitration confirmed the recordings. FAA officials began reviewing diversion protocols across all U.S. carriers. Other airlines reached out to Elias to request guidance. Within 3 months, Delta, Pacific Horizon, and 2 regional carriers had adopted their own versions of the Oversight Council. But the most profound impact came quietly. At airports across the country, passengers noticed subtle shifts: friendlier tones, more consistent service, faster resolution of in-flight issues. Flight attendants underwent new training focused not just on policy, but on empathy. And complaints were no longer routed into voids. They triggered transparent investigations with third-party oversight. 6 months later, Elias boarded another Skywing flight. Flight 268, same route. He wore the same suit. Saturday in the same seat. But this time, the atmosphere was different. A new lead attendant, Natalie, the young woman who had once looked away in shame, approached him with calm professionalism. "Mr. Chapman," she said, "your Dalmore 21 is ready, and the chef prepared your pre-ordered pescatarian plate exactly to your specifications. Would you like it served now or after takeoff?" Elias smiled. "After takeoff is fine. Thank you." As she turned to serve the next passenger, she paused. "Sir," she added, "for what it's worth, we talk about what happened a lot. And I want you to know, it changed things." Elias nodded. "It was never about revenge," he said. "It was about making sure no